bar graphs. So when we're looking at bar graphs, we're looking at a way to represent qualitative data. So data that has labels, data that is not numerical. There are two types. There can be vertical bar graphs or horizontal bar graphs, but the majority of what we see is vertical bar graphs. All bar graphs must have the following. Number one, a clear title. So clear meaning it really represents what the data is about and is specific enough to give people a good sense of what the graph means. Two, identification of the horizontal axis. So X. Identification for number three, identification of the vertical axis. So Y. Number four, identification of the individual bars. So what does this mean? This is the possible values of your variable. And when we do an example, all of this will be much more clear. Number five is a clear graduation of the vertical, usually the vertical axis. And this, of course, depends on the range and scale of the frequencies. So if you have, for example, data that's like 1 and 5 and 10 and 7, you're not going to use a scale of 10 because then it won't show the data clearly. But if you have scales of 100, 200, 1,000, you're not going to use ones because it's going to be too hard to fit everything in. 6, you want to make sure you have accurate numbers from the frequency table. So be careful, a lot of people make mistakes just copying things, and this leads to lost marks for the silliest of reasons. You must have equal spacing between the bars, and this may seem unnecessary, but it really does skew someone's reading of the graph if they're not spaced equally, because it looks like something's missing. And you have to have equal widths of the bars. And this is for the same reason. If one is thin and one is thick, it distorts people's understanding of the information. So let's do an example. Let's say we had favorite quarantine pastime. This was actually taken from the survey. And of course, we'd have our frequency. So the first option was TV and streaming. That had 7 people. We had video games. That had 5 people. Reading. 4. Arts and crafts. Well, had only 1. Social media. Had 4. Exercise. Had 10. Baking. Had 2, and so our total was 33. If we were going to then take this information and make it into a bar graph, first of all, we'd have to have the right amount of space, and then we would need to use all of those 8 points we have above. So number 1, we need to have a clear title. So our title would be Favorite Quarantine Pastimes. And let's say that this was from her 1A students. Okay? Because you want to be as specific as possible so people understand the data. Second thing we need is an identification of the horizontal axis. So this would be pastimes. So this, just in case you're keeping track, this was number 1. This is number 2. Number 3 is identification of the vertical axis. So that would be frequency, of selections by 1A students. So this is 3. 4, we have our individual bars. So often people do shorter versions of this, but then if you do that, if you have abbreviations, then somewhere you have to have a legend to explain what they are. Video games, reading, arts and crafts, social media, exercise, and baking. Okay, so that's number 4. Number 5, clear graduation of the vertical axis. So you always start with 0. Sometimes there'll be a break if there's information that needs a break. But for now, we're just going to start with 0. Looking at the types of numbers you have here, you'd probably want to go with a small graduation. In this case, I think I'm just going to go with 1, so I can indicate it. Okay, so I've put it up to 15. I want it to be higher than my highest value. And I could number them all, or I could just number some of them. Usually you'd number the first one to give a sense of what the scale is. So this is number 5. And just to make it easier, so number 6, accurate numbers from the frequency table. So we're gonna have TV stream, that is 7, video games is 5, reading is 4. Now it's not perfect, but you do want to try your best to make these accurate, but you're doing it by hand. You don't need to measure it out with a ruler, but you want it to be clear. 1. Social media is 4. Exercise is 10. And baking is 2. Okay, so this then is number 6. Okay, number 7, equal spacing between bars is here. And again, it's not perfect because I'm drawing it by hand, but they're more or less the same. And then 8 is the spacing in here. And again, it's more or less the same.